10 signs we are entering a new dark age. Before we begin, we need to clarify something. The Dark Ages were not dark. In fact, most of the reasons why people consider the early Middle Ages gloomy are nothing more than a common misconception about the era. In the introduction to the 10 main reasons, the Middle Ages were not dark, I said, the term Dark Ages is almost as ancient as the period itself. It was coined in the 1330s by Italian scholar Petrarch to refer to the decline of Latin literature. This was later perceived by Protestant reformers, 16th century, and then by members of the Enlightenment, 18th century, as a derogatory term with much broader implications because they saw their own enlightenment absent from an earlier period. Here, unfortunately, are the first 10 signs that we are entering a new era of darkness. Social media censorship. Twitter recently announced a new tool in the fight against freedom of speech and the pursuit of wisdom, blocking from person to person. The new option will allow users to choose who can and cannot respond to their tweets. In other words, you can oversee a whole debate in which only those people who agree with your point of view will be visible to everyone who reads. Facebook now adds notifications to certain posts to warn people that they may contain false information, even if they don't. And Instagram removes posts that may be offensive to some people. On top of that, entire groups are completely banned from all of the above sites for simply insulting others or disseminating information that the owners of these sites do not agree with, whether they are right or wrong. In the United States, where most of these companies are based, they have legal rights to suppress freedom of speech. The ultimate solution to these terrible knowledge-sharing attacks is for new sites to appear unhindered due to the political bias of the owners of billionaires and shareholders who believe that outcomes are more important than love for wisdom. Suppression of speakers on campuses. Freedom of speech includes the right to protest words that you disagree with. Those who beat protesters at rallies cannot claim support for freedom of speech more than Lenin can claim support for capitalism. But there is your democratic right to protest, and then this right is used to completely close the views against which you are protesting. Recently, it seems that protesters are striving exclusively for the latter. The idea of creating an environment in which your opponent is afraid to enter seems to have really worked around 2013. Prior to this, protests on campuses rarely blocked the presence of a guest speaker. Speakers such as Milo Yiannopoulos, clip above, have been expelled from college campuses, as have speakers such as Supreme Court Justice Abortion Judge Carol Baer. Each time this happens, it shows how little attention is now paid to freedom of speech and enlightened debate compared to a simple cry of the enemy. We must be incredibly worried that the so-called bastions of freedom of speech, namely universities, are currently the source of such a great deal of opposition to freedom. When the debate ends, the discovery of new knowledge ends. YouTube censorship. The people behind the scenes at Google decided to save us from ourselves and hide the conspiracy theory and other content that they don't like. Their reason is that they prevent us from delusion. This certainly resembles the incredibly wise quote of T.S. Eliot, "Most of the evil in this world is committed by people with good intentions." Google's motivation, if true, may seem virtuous, but there is one problem: conspiracy theories are often true. For example, the MKUltra project, a terrifying CIA mind control experiment. What about the theory that support for the Iraq War was falsely created because of the lie that children were being thrown out of incubators? And speaking of wars, the war in Vietnam was based on one big lie, which was only talked about in conspiracy theory circles until the CIA confirmed that it was true. Of course, I mean the incident in the Gulf of Tonkin. How many discussions of conspiracies are being deleted and hidden by Google right now? And, of course, right now we most need these discussions around China, the coronavirus and the deep state in politics. Fortunately, because Listverse only deals with conspiracies, our video above was skipped by Google censors. Enjoy while you can. Destroying Google search. Over the past 3 decades, we have transmitted a wealth of human knowledge to a company that had the motto "Don't be evil," until 2018, when he quietly placed it in the last sentence of his code of conduct. Now it's just an afterthought. Over the past 2 years, Google has gradually eroded the quality of its search results, first filling them with sponsored publications, and now, as of May 2020, it would seem to replace the entire index with results that provide financial support to Google and its friends during. Webmaster forums are full of website owners announcing that their sites are out of date as % of their search traffic is reduced in favor of large brand results from companies that match Google's worldview. It is probably fair to say that the future of the World Wide Web is where most of the search results end in 404 error, page not found. Google is actually shutting down the internet. When all search traffic is gone, the remaining sites will be forced to look for subscription models. Chained Bibles. Remember the Bible chained in the last dark centuries? They were chained because they were incredibly valuable so as not to interfere with people reading them. Guess what? They're coming back. As Google began what appears to be its latest onslaught on small and medium-sized information websites and YouTube, more information either disappears or is blocked by paid networks and subscribers. Once all the best content has been blocked, we will finally reach the point where the network will be the exact opposite of what it should have been. Instead of distributing information around the world for free, obviously, for money paid by advertising, we will have a closed repository of knowledge only for those who can afford it. And unlike the Bible in the Middle Ages, we do not have internet priests who can read it to us every day. This is truly a deliberate removal of learning for all but the wealthy elite. And by the way, this is not only about small sites and creators. Joe Rogan Spotify. The most famous name in podcasting has just announced that it goes to Spotify, where, due to the inconvenience of listening to ads, you can access its podcasts. He's probably the first really big name to have told Google that he won't tolerate their censorship. So far, Rogan has been earning $36 million a year on his Google podcasts, but Spotify has lured him a promise of $100 million. It is not surprising that he is ready to take the risk and switch to a paid service. For Joe, this is great in terms of censorship, until Spotify is bought by Google and begins to apply its own restrictions on content. This, however, serves to show us what restrictive access to information will be. Only time will tell whether the Massachusetts exodus of content creators to this new platform will expand or reduce our shared access to knowledge. We are now witnessing a consolidation into several extremely large corporations, and their principles and ethics, or lack thereof, will determine whose voices and which stories we will all hear in the future. Wayback Machine censored. He who controls the past, the party slogan directed, controls the future. He who controls the present controls the past. These words from a 1984 frighteningly prophetic novel by George Orwell sound believable, especially today. Wayback Machine, the online archive, is an amazing site that shows pictures of most parts of the World Wide Web dating back decades. In many cases, it was used to show deceptive editing from the mainstream media. But, unfortunately, now there has come a dangerous turn on the dark road of censorship. Wayback Machine recently began flagging some archive pages as misinformation, especially with regard to coronavirus. It retroactively claims that historical news or events were not true. It is just a matter of time before they begin to remove the original content itself or replace misinformation with facts, as defined by unnamed Backstage Participants. Free discussion in science. Scientists and doctors are now regularly dismissed for discoveries, or even support for theories, that are currently considered contrary to ideas, proven by scientific consensus, argumentum ad verecundum by anyone. A loud presence on social networks is largely behind this terrible situation. Scientists should not be strangled, and it does not matter how offensive their findings or views are, they should be exposed to fresh air for discussion. If we are not allowed to argue with ideas, how can we really show that they are wrong or prove that their opposite is true? A new theology is formed from medium to race and gender, and casting doubt on this is equivalent to heresy when shame and ostracism become new burning at the stake. The zombie apocalypse. The first thing I did when the New Zealand shops and restaurants reopened after the closure of the coronavirus was to spend a day in the city browsing the shops and having lunch with friends. In accordance with the new precautions that allow us to keep everything open, some stores must limit the total number of customers in their stores at any given time. This has led to the emergence of lines outside of many of our main stores, lines that can usually only be seen in communist or socialist countries. There are no malls in Wellington City, so the streets are now full of people politely waiting outside the shops and looking at the shiny screens of the phones in their hands. It dawned on me, the zombie apocalypse is not something from a horror movie or TV series, it is here and now. Instead of talking and sharing their experiences and knowledge, instead of reading a book or even a magazine, people play games or watch videos on YouTube, those that Google has not yet suppressed. This is a zombie apocalypse, and it is voluntary. Until you see a city street full of people with empty faces looking down, you will not be able to truly appreciate how terrible this is. As free as we decided to destroy our brain in this way, we must also stop freely. At this stage, this seems unlikely. I hope that I am wrong. Historical sources of information may disappear. Social distancing will have many unforeseen consequences. Since cash has already been banned in some places because paper is such a good carrier of the virus, it can be assumed that human knowledge institutions, such as libraries and, to a lesser extent, museums, may ultimately also be closed in the name of public security. It would be partially manageable if it were not for the fact that the rest of the elements on this list also appear at the same time. As soon as all sites disappear, with the exception of the extremely dubious Wikipedia at the end of the Google search Holocaust, we can finally get distracted from the general knowledge pool of the ancestors on which we built our amazing and wonderful society. Why is this happening? It is easy to manage one large corporation, and it is impossible to control thousands of small ones. Distributor economics, my favorite type, argues that there are not too many capitalists and too few. I stole it from G.K. Chesterton, preferring the means of production that will belong to many family enterprises, rather than giant corporations. What we see in the world now is a movement towards the opposite. Forces, whoever you call them, understand that to maintain control over large parts of society and how we think and function, the end of small business is required. This may not be 100% the cause of the strange changes that we are currently experiencing, but regardless of the goal, we can confidently say that every day more and more information is deleted from the internet and becomes inaccessible. We can no longer pretend that we are in a flourishing golden age of knowledge. We are on the verge of the greatest dark age in the history of mankind. But in conclusion, the second and more positive quote by T.S. Eliot, "Darkness declares the glory of the light." Perhaps we can find some comfort in this.